Hi, welcome back to the Behavioral Insights channel. I'm Dr. Lisa Brothers, and in today's video, we're going to talk about why it is so difficult to stay committed and follow through consistently with long-term goals, especially. And we're going to build off of something I recently shared, which is the 5 phases of sustained behavior change. So we're really focusing more on long-term goals, things we're setting out to move towards maybe 6, 12 or more months down the road. And how do we actually get ourselves from the point of what I call a catalyst, where we recognize there's a problem, but there's also an opportunity for us to change, to do something different? How do we move from that all the way to achieving the desired result and beyond? So let's review real quick the 5 phases of sustained behavior change. So once there's that catalyst event, we recognize there's a problem and there's an opportunity. That brings us to the first phase, and that is desire. So we start to desire this new result, this change. We want to move in this direction, but it's not until we make a commitment that we start to actually move towards it. The commitment says, okay, I'm going to do this now. So that brings us into the second phase, and this is where behavior can be so fragile. It's the phase of acquisition. So I'm a behavior analyst, and I'm very well trained to really look at the environmental influence on behavior. And this is where a lot of us end up quitting before we see any visible progress. And so does that mean that we don't pursue long-term goals anymore? I don't think so. I think it means that we need to leverage some environmental design here so that we can support those behaviors through this fragile phase of acquisition and see it through to the point that we start to see progress and really build some momentum in that way. And so once we get through the acquisition phase, then we move into what I call the maintenance phase. And it sounds nice and easy, but really what's happening here is a lot of testing. So it's not as easy as it seems. Just because we saw a little bit of visible progress doesn't mean that it's smooth sailing. A lot of times we encounter different challenges in this phase, some setbacks, maybe we experience some scrutiny, some judgment. Maybe we even start to kind of compare our rate of progress to other people's and start to think like, wow, this isn't really working. Even though I saw progress, mine isn't really at the same rate or speed of somebody else's. So I'm behind and maybe I should just give up. So like there's all that stuff that happens in this phase of maintenance. So it's really important that we keep some of that environmental design from the acquisition phase, that we keep that going in the maintenance phase so that we can keep seeing it through to the point that progress starts to compound. That's where it starts to become noticeable to other people. And they're like, oh, they are really making progress here. Like I can actually see it and notice it. And so that phase I like to call the accelerator phase, because now we're building off of a foundation where we've already made progress, starting to compound. We're starting to see some social recognition, which goes a long way in terms of identifying with different changes that you're making and just continuing to go to get to the point that you achieve that desired result. And then beyond that, what happens is you enter a new phase called the lifestyle phase. And that's where a lot of times the changes that we've made, they start to become just part of the way that we operate, the way that people identify with us, and it starts to become really natural. And it's because it's really tied to a lot of other meaningful things in our life. So say, for example, the desired result is to pursue a career, and then you get the desired career. That's fine, but then you maintain that over the long period because that becomes tied to a lot of other things, your professional development, financial security, hopefully. So there's a lot of other stuff that becomes associated with that behavior change over the long term that maintains it. I hope that's making sense if you're seeing this. And so what we're going to do in today's video is really look at this acquisition phase, because that is where most people quit before they actually see visible progress. So I'm going to share 3 ways that you can really start this week to increase your chances of following through until the point that you see some progress. So the first one is going to be to make it simple. So we want to make the action that you're saying you're struggling to follow through with, make it smaller, make it more specific, and really decrease that effort involved to get started. That's going to go such a long way in terms of building up this trust in your ability to follow through. And it sounds like so simple that you wouldn't even want to give it a try. But I tell you what, instead of saying, I'm going to write for an hour every day when you haven't been effectively building up that habit or routine, start smaller. Be really specific. What's the goal of that writing session? Could you start with an expectation that it's only 15 minutes and then build from there once you're consistently showing up and putting your bottom in the chair and doing it? So like that could be applied to whatever goal is. Can you start smaller and more specific and really decrease the effort involved to start? And I think that really includes how many decisions you have to make to actually show up and do the thing as well. If you're like, oh, I'm going to write, but I have no idea what I'm going to write about, that increases the effort a lot. There's a lot of decision making involved there. Okay, number 2, arranging your environment so that the action is easier to do and it's harder to forget. So this is all about your environment and thinking about, okay, when it comes to my particular goal, what would it look like to make that easier in the moment? If it's healthy eating, is there things that you can plan and prepare ahead of time? If it's working out, can you make the stuff more accessible? If it's doing your writing, can you start with a log each day where you basically jot down, like, here's the goal for today's session, here's where I left off, here's what to do next, so that the next time you sit down, it's easier to do because you already know what the goal of the session is, right? Can you make it harder to forget? So can you put things out? Can you set cues or reminders to make sure you're not forgetting and getting to the end of the day and be like, oh, I didn't even think to do that, right? And then the third one is creating faster feedback. This is so, so important because it's one of the main reasons that we quit early here, because we're not seeing that progress. We're not getting that feedback. So we need to build that in. And I'm going to give you several examples here. So one might be maybe tracking your completion. I like to think of tracking just showing up consistently, that follow through. I like to think of tracking that long before I look for evidence of some sort of positive result from that, whether it's sitting down to write or if it's showing up for the exercise routine. And then you also want to consider whether you can make it visible. So you can maybe have a habit tracker or something where you make it a little bit more visible to show you that you are following through. The next piece could be maybe sharing with others for accountability. That could be really helpful too. Breaking it into short-term milestones so you don't feel like I'm trying to pursue this big, crazy, ambitious goal that's so far away, but you can start to focus on what's the next milestone that I'm looking to hit, and making sure those are meaningful to you. But when you break it up into those littler milestones, it can really help you sense and feel more progress than when you're looking at the full path ahead. And the last piece for faster feedback is having some sort of a regular weekly practice. I like to do it weekly because I think a week is like the perfect amount of time. You can acknowledge where you followed through. You can also notice where you've started to drift a little bit, and it allows you to course correct a lot sooner. And so that's it. Those are the 3 ways that you can really increase your chances of following through in this phase, keeping it simple, thinking about what you can do in your environment, and making sure you're getting more immediate feedback, faster feedback for that. If you want a simple way to stay reminded to engage in that weekly practice, I'll link down below to my Friday Recalibration. I send that out every Friday afternoon, and it just cues you to engage in that brief practice of acknowledging where you followed through, notice where you might be drifting, and helps you really simplify what it looks like to course correct. Instead of heading into the next week with a 90-item to-do list, you just are very clear on what is it that I really need to prioritize and what does that look like heading into next week. So you kind of simplify and reduce the overwhelm involved there. So if that's something you're interested in, I'll link to that down below and you can check that out.